everyone. Welcome back. You'll notice today's episode is audio only. I'm working on a big project that I'm excited to hopefully be able to share with you all soon. But in the meantime, it was faster for me to get this episode out to you as audio. Today, I want to talk with you about an important topic, and that's about a temptation that many of you who listen to my podcast might face. It's the temptation to become cynical. If you're a discerning Christian, then you notice a lot of unbiblical teachings and practices in the church, and it can be easy to get suspicious of every church and skeptical about the possibility of ever finding a sound church and even to withdraw. You want to worship and serve God freely, but it seems like you bump into false teachings and sloppy thinking everywhere you look, in worship music, sermons, various ministries. And if you were ever part of the New Apostolic Reformation or another dangerous movement, then you're probably on high alert. You may be fearful of being deceived again. So becoming cynical is basically a form of protection for yourself and for others. Then to make things worse, if you've tried to warn others about false teaching in the church, it can feel like people often look at you like you're overly sensitive or too critical, that the problem is you. You may have even experienced outright rejection or hostility for bringing up your concerns about false teaching you see coming into the church. So the temptation to become cynical is understandable. I imagine that people in certain occupations are also drawn to cynicism. For example, police officers, they see lots of bad stuff all the time, or people in other lines of work where they see lots of bad stuff. Well, many people may see a park or a shopping center. A police officer may see a drug dealer hang out or a place where other illegal activities occur. Well, it's similar when you become aware of false teaching in the church and even false movements like NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation. You can't unsee them. It's easy to become jaded, but you must fight that temptation. Even though it's enticing to become cynical, it's not the answer. As anyone knows who's ever become cynical before, as any Christians know, that cynicism can really dampen their joy with God and harm their fellowship with other believers and even cause them to stay away from the church completely. This reminds me of what we read about the church in Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2. Jesus commends the Ephesian Christians because they exposed false apostles. That was really good. But he also reprimands them and says that they've lost their first love. They were big on discernment, but they had lost their warm hearts for God and perhaps for their fellow believers. God doesn't want us to become cynical, lose our joy, and isolate ourselves. It's important to stay non-cynical, and it is possible, even though it may not seem like it. So how can we stay discerning without becoming despairing and distrustful of everyone and everything? I want to share 3 things that have helped me. First, it helps to remind ourselves that we're all at different stages of our walks with God, different levels of spiritual maturity and knowledge, and we have different life experiences. Some of us were raised in Christian homes where we had very discerning parents. I had a very discerning father, and that has really helped me become more discerning. But not everyone was raised in a Christian home, or they didn't attend a church where the teachers were discerning. And so not all people are equally equipped to detect error, especially more subtle error. Thankfully, God is gracious with us, and he's patient with all of us. And in the same way, we need to be gracious and patient with others who may not be as far along in their spiritual walk and spiritual growth as we are. I mean, I think back to worship songs that I used to sing as a high schooler, mission trips at camp and college. When I think of those songs, they make me nostalgic. I think about the just joy I was experiencing with my walk with God and all of the exciting things at that time. But if I'm honest, they also make me cringe because I think about the lyrics of some of those songs and they aren't very biblical. But God has worked in me and I've grown in my knowledge of Scripture, my discernment. And in the same way, we have to be patient while God works in other people and they are growing. Remembering that people are all at different stages in their spiritual maturity will help us stay humble and help us not to look down on other believers who may be less discerning than us. And the truth is, we may be really discerning, but they may have other strengths that we don't have. I think about when I was a kid, my dad had a friend who was a pastor of another denomination, and my dad knew that this pastor had some doctrinal differences, and he thought that pastor was in error about some things. And they would talk a lot and have discussions. And it occurred to my dad that this pastor, even though he wasn't as discerning, he was an exceptionally loving man, and he had character traits that my dad really admired and wanted to grow in himself. So the takeaway for him is that discernment is necessary, but it's not everything. Now, I'm not softening on the importance of discernment, as anyone knows who has read my 4 books, critiquing the New Apostolic Reformation books I co-authored with Doug Guyvett, or as anybody knows who's been following my podcast for some time and my other work, I have devoted my life work to helping other Christians grow in spiritual discernment. It's something I'm extremely passionate about. But it can be easy to look down on other believers who don't share our strengths, even our strength for discernment, and overlook their strengths. This reminds me of what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12, when he's addressing the different spiritual gifts God has given believers in the church. He compares those gifts to the parts of the human body and how each part contributes something essential. And he points out how crazy it would be for the eye to tell the hand it doesn't need it, or the head to tell the feet it doesn't need them. He says, if the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. So in other words, we need other believers' gifts, just as they need ours. So if we use our discernment and knowledge to help other believers along in their walk with God and their growth, if that's our primary motivation, rather than just being right, it will help us avoid frustration and cynicism. Again, I'm not talking here about staying in an unhealthy church or trying to right a sunken ship. False teachers and false teaching are dangerous and they must be avoided. But there are degrees of doctrinal error, and some are less serious than others. It helps to keep in mind that there are many generally sound churches. I'm not talking about churches that are perfect or error-free. Of course, there wouldn't be any church like that. But the people in those churches do desire to be discerning, even while they have room to grow. Recognizing this will help you not be distrustful of all churches and allow you to joyfully participate in those churches while doing your part to warn others about anything unhealthy that might start creeping in. So if you find yourself starting to get cynical, remind yourself that others are in different stages of their walks with God and show them the same patience God and others have shown you. The second thing that has helped me not become cynical as I expose and warn people about false teachings is not focusing only on the false. What I mean by that is that you don't focus on false teachings all the time, because that's not healthy. I'm not saying don't stop exercising discernment. You should never do that, of course. That's dangerous. But you don't want to focus on the false exclusively and not ever think about the true. Now, that requires extra intentionality for someone like me, whose work has largely been focused on warning people about false teaching and researching false religious movements. And my critics will say, on Facebook and comments I see on Facebook and other places on social media, they'll say that I shouldn't be focusing on false teaching so much and that that's wrong. And I don't agree with that. I think that people in the church have specialties. And as I've already said, God has gifted people and equipped people differently. So I don't agree with them about that. But not everyone, of course, is required to focus so much on false teachings. I had a theology professor when I was in college who warned as students to be mindful before going into a branch of theology called polemics. And polemics, if you don't know, it basically is the branch of theology that addresses heresy and false teachings. He warned as students that going into that could really take a toll on you because it required you to read books and listen to teachings from false teachers all the time. And that stuff's really icky. And he said that takes a certain kind of person to be able to do that. Now, of course, not all Christians are called to be polemicists, but we are all called to be discerning. And so that means you must think about false teaching to be aware. But don't only watch podcasts about false teaching. And I say that while being a podcaster who focuses on false teaching. And don't only read books by false teachers. I say that as someone who runs a book club where we just finished dissecting a book by Bill Johnson. So I obviously see value in knowing about false teachings. But if you only focus on the false and the ugly, that's not good for your state of mind. And you'll start to think that's all there is. And you won't see the good that is there too. When I was younger, I think recently married, and I got into watching murder mysteries on television. And my husband would say, I don't know how you could watch those. Those are really dark and disturbing. But I got into watching these mysteries and seeing how they were solved and the murderers were caught. And after a while, I noticed that when I was home alone, if I heard an unfamiliar sound, I would just be like, oh no, there's a murderer coming after me. And I realized it was affecting my thinking, not in a good way, to watch all those shows. So I stopped watching them. I'll admit that now, from time to time, I still do watch them, but I also really limit how much I watch them because I remember how it impacted my thinking. Now, that's not a perfect analogy because we can't just stop thinking about false teaching, but we can balance our input. Once I invited a prosecuting attorney to speak to my class of middle school students to help them prepare for mock trial. And this particular attorney focused exclusively on murder trials. One of my students asked him, how do you deal with thinking about these murder trials all the time, all this dark stuff that you have to think about? How do you do that without while staying sane? What he told my students was that he would not accept every case that came his way. He would intentionally make decisions sometimes to turn down certain cases. And he would also set aside time to just walk away from his work and spend time with his wife and think about other things. So those dark things weren't just filling his head all the time. And I think that's really helpful. I think that can help provide advice for those of us who focus on discernment. It's important that we think about other things besides just false teachings, that our knowledge of Scripture is continuing to grow. And of course, Scripture does address false teaching quite a bit, but that we read all of Scripture and not just the parts that talk about false teachers and false teaching. And also that our knowledge of theology is well-rounded, and that's growing, not just the theology that relates directly to addressing false teaching and heresy, but all of theology. We can also be spending time listening to theologically rich worship music. We should be spending time with our family and fellowshipping with other believers, going out in nature and just enjoying God's beautiful creation. Fill your soul with edifying, beautiful things. As the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So if you want to stay non-cynical, don't focus only on the false. The last thing I want to share with you that has helped me stay non-cynical is to find your people. What I mean by that is not creating an echo chamber of people who think just like you and who will affirm everything you say and agree with everything you say. But you need to find other discerning believers who see what you see, who see the false teachings in the church and who see the dangers. And it's good to get together with them and share what you're thinking about and strategize with them about ways that you can respond that will help you remain faithful to God and honor Him and help other people be warned about these false teachings. And these other people sometimes may even tell you, you're making too much out of something and that's not as big of a deal as you think it is. You might need to let that go. As we learn in Scripture, in the Proverbs, there is wisdom in having many counselors. And a big reason it's important for you to find these people is just to see that you're not alone. Like Elijah, you may recall the story about Elijah in 1 Kings. He just had a major victory where he defeated hundreds of false prophets of Baal. But after that, the false prophet Jezebel was out to get him. And so he fled and he was holed up in a cave. He was despairing of his life because people were seeking to kill him. And he felt like he was the only one, that he was all alone. God asked him, Elijah, what are you doing here? And his answer shows really his sour state of mind. Elijah said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So Elijah thought he was all alone, but he wasn't alone. God informed Elijah that he was raising up a new leadership that would overturn the Baal worship. And he informed him that he was raising up a successor for Elijah, a prophet named Elisha. And on top of that, God revealed that there were 7,000 people in Israel who had resisted the worship of Baal. 7,000. Elijah needed a reminder that he wasn't the only one resisting false teachings, and so do we. So seek out those who share your concerns. You may already know who some of those people are just from talking with different people and finding out that they're concerned about the things you are. But if you don't know how to find those people, there are some different things you can do. Consider starting a book study in your church, if that's something that you would be allowed to do in your church, where you study a book that's focused on developing discernment. And when you do that, it will draw out the people in the church who share your same love for and concern about discernment. It will also help cultivate a culture of discernment in your church. You can also attend conferences where speakers address issues related to discernment. There are lots of those. There are Facebook groups and different groups online where people talk about things like the New Apostolic Reformation and how they came out of that movement. They encourage each other, share information, give advice, and just help each other grow in discernment. I have a Substack community and book club where we discuss these issues, particularly related to the New Apostolic Reformation, since that's been a major area of my focus. We just finished reading a book written by Bill Johnson, a leading apostle in NAR. And so a focus of this club is reading primary sources so we can really see what the apostles and prophets of NAR teach right out of their own mouths to help us understand the teachings better and able to help other people come out of this movement. We'll be starting a new book soon. This book is actually critiquing the Word of Faith movement. Word of Faith teachings are really integral to NAR, teachings about prayer declarations, health, prosperity, these type of things. And so that's why we are reading a book about the Word of Faith movement. I'd love for you to join us. Your monthly membership subscription will also help support my work. You can find my community at hollypivek.substack.com. Again, that's hollypivek.substack.com. Don't worry about writing that down if you're driving. I'll include a link in the show notes. But however you do it, find your people so you don't grow cynical by mistakenly thinking you are the only one who cares about false teaching. So those are my 3 tips for not becoming cynical as you exercise discernment. Remember that we are all at different places in our walks with God. Don't focus only on the false. and find like-minded believers. And here's one final word of encouragement. If you're tempted to give up, if you think that your efforts to warn people about false teaching is not making any difference, remember these words from the Apostle Paul in Galatians 6, verse 9. I think of them frequently. He said, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." So keep at it. Even if no one changes their mind, your efforts will be rewarded in eternity. And you may not see it now, but your efforts are very likely making a difference. Helping people grow in discernment takes time, it takes patience, it's a process, just like it was for us. Developing discernment does not happen overnight, but inch by inch. So play the long game. Well, that's all I have for today. Now, let me ask you, what has helped you not become cynical? I want to know. Let me know in the comments.